Hello. This video is brought to you by the fact that I'm in a bit of a reading slump right now. I haven't quite recovered from what Arthur C. Clarke did to me with the deep range there on the to be filed pile over here, because I'm running out of room on the bookshelf. I have moved on to another book, which I'm sure I'll review before too long, but I haven't really fully committed to it. And yeah, so I'm not fully in my reading zone right at the moment. And a lovely lady called Bianca Eleanor commented on a previous video that I made and asked me if I had tried doing the Booktube Newbie channel. Newbie Tag, that's it, Newbie Tag. I'd never heard of it because, technologically speaking, I am, if not quite a Luddite, I'm still in the Luddite ballpark, kind of. So I hadn't heard of it. I googled it a little bit. I saw a couple of newbie tags on a few other people. I'm not wholly a newbie. I started this channel in May, but I'm still pretty new to it, so I thought I'd go along. Apparently it originally started by an individual who is no longer on YouTube anymore, and it was then 7 questions. Now the tag seems to take us to 10 questions, so I'm going to answer the 10 questions on this video. This will be the second video I have made this month that wasn't an outright book review. It's like, who am I and what have I done with the omnivorous reader, right? Okay, question number 1 is, why did you start this channel? And I started this channel for a secondary review platform. My primary review platform is Goodreads, and it has been for quite a long time, I think since 2011. I started Goodreads as a review channel because I read a lot too fast and I have a poor memory, so I was picking books off the library shelf. In 2011 I was reading a lot of supernatural fiction, supernatural romance. There's some kinds of books I remember well, but those weren't it, and mainstream fiction unfortunately often isn't it either. So I was picking up a book, I was reading the back of it, I was taking it home, and by the page number 3 I realised I'd already read it, and probably not that long ago. So I started reviewing on Goodreads. Me and Goodreads have had a very good relationship for many years, but since Amazon bought them, there's been some peculiarities, and that has included deleting some of my reviews. Those reviews are my literary memory. They are how I remember books. Not literal memory, literary memory. You got that right. So I started desperately looking around for another platform. I've tried a couple, not with huge success. I've tried saving them on my own laptop. Again, I think I probably needed to diversify. So I started to see a few other people doing book reviews, and I thought, why not use YouTube? And that's how I came to start YouTube. These are reviews. I make them primarily for me. By making a review of a book that I'm reading, I remember that book better. My relationship to the book that I'm reading changes through the knowledge that I'm going to review it. I've become a more active, more participating reader. I'm more analytical about it. I don't have a literature background. This has made me think about literature and how it works, and it has been excellent for my reading process. So I started this channel to review the books that I read, and I read all sorts of books, so it's the Omnivorous Reader channel. What are some fun and unique things you can bring to YouTube? Well, I can manage the unique. I am unique. My reading taste is, if not unique, at least pretty unusual. So that covers the unique, I guess. As for fun, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm a fun person. I don't go out drinking and clubbing very often. That's many people's definition of fun. I stay home and read a lot, so I can bring a lot of that to this channel. I have a couple of friends that think it's exceptionally funny when I get angry at a book and I rant and I rave, especially if I wave my hands around a lot, because having lived in the Middle East for a few years growing up, there's some language patterns that you never really lose. I guess that's fun when I get really angry at a book like I did with Arthur C. Clarke. There will be raving and ranting and waving my arms around. But I don't want to trash books and I don't want to trash authors. I like to think that I'm going to be balanced. I'm going to see the good and the bad. Only some of them are pretty terrible. And then I'm going to rant. Enjoy my rants? Maybe they'll be fun. Question 3. What am I the most excited about for this channel? Books. I will be reviewing books. Other people are reviewing books, and some of those people may interact with me. People may watch my reviews and want to interact with me about the books I'm reading or they're reading. Maybe I'll get to recommend some books to people because I love recommending books to people. So I'm a bit excited about that. I'm excited about the fact that it will improve my relationships to books and reading. It's going to make me analytical in a whole new fashion, I'm sure, in the same way that Goodreads made me a whole new literary critic style of reader. I'm sure YouTube will do the same. Why do you love reading? Why do you love reading? Is that a question? What? This is where I wish I was more technological. The only possible answer to question 4, why do you love reading, would be me staring at the camera with crickets going brink, brink in the background, because, I can't even answer that question. I don't think I would know who I was without reading. It's not a question of loving reading. I do love reading. I love being taken to new places. I love learning new things. I like talking to people about reading. I love immersing myself in a book so much that people can call my name and I won't hear it. I love all those things, but it's a bit beyond just loving reading. It's like, I read, therefore I am? I don't know. Will that do? Yeah, it's going to have to do. Question number 5. What book or series got you into reading? I prepared visual aids for this one. Now, I started reading really early, and that's a later question. But I don't remember when I started reading. I started reading before I could actually remember myself as differentiated from reading. My parents were both readers. 2 of the books that I remember from the earliest possible reading experience of my life were when I was being read to, bedtime stories as a child. And there's 2 special books that got me into this. One is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. As you can see, this is a really old copy. If I twist it around, you may see the texture. This copy is cloth that has been bound. It's not in great condition. I don't take great care of my books, and this didn't start off as my book. This was awarded to my mother as an equal second prize in Brighton Road St Kilda School in 1944. And she had it her whole life, and she read it as a bedtime story to me, and so did my father, who also knew Kenneth Grahame well. I have to admit, I preferred my father's reading. He did all the voices, and he got so into Ratty, he'd make the motions of a Ratty as well. So this is one of the 2 books that I remember well enough and recognize as getting me into reading. And it was my mother's. The other one is The Hobbit. And this one was my father's. It too has suffered over the years significantly. And I have another copy that I read on the beach if I want to read it, The Hobbit on the beach. But I just loved the artwork on it. Again, this was a bedtime story that my parents read to me. I could read already by this stage, maybe, but I was probably on See Quack the Duck, See Duck Quack type books. These are the books that got me into reading because I would be cuddled up to my parent reading over their arm as they read to me. Question 5. No, I've done question 5. Question 6. What questions would you ask your favourite booktubers? And that's a hard one. My favourite booktubers, I've only just got into Booktube, by the way, in the last few months. There's some booktubers I really enjoy, and I will go and watch a video as soon as they post them. What would I ask them? I don't really know. Wait, no, I do know. I would get all my favourite booktubers around a table, that table over there, and I would go up and I would ask them all, what would you like to drink? I would then serve them a said drink. We would all go bottoms up, have a drink, and as we drank, we would start talking about books and reading and authors, and it would be glorious. The rest of the questions would follow naturally from the first one. I'm pretty sure they tend to. There's some excellent booktubers out there that I follow, by the way. Bookpilled, I'm not sure that he'd come to my drinking party. He's got millions of followers. He's probably a bit busy. Sci-Fi Scavenger might, over in the UK. Bit of a long distance for a drink, mate, but you know. He does excellent sci-fi, classic sci-fi books. SF Worlds of Wonder, I believe he's over, yes, he's definitely over in America somewhere. Again, bit far to come for a drink of an afternoon, but you know. Two to Ramble, Daisy Ex Machina, the speculative detective, and there's a lady who reviews fantasy called Elliot Brooks. It has to be booktubers, right? Otherwise, I think probably my favourite YouTube channel is actually Dive Talk. Gus and Woody, they'll never see this. They're into diving, not books. Or maybe they're also into books. Who knows? If you see this, Gus and Woody, love your channel. All of those, many drinks, many conversations. I'm sure it would be great. I love their channels. Love their books. Question number 7. What challenges do you think starting a YouTube channel will be the hardest to overcome? Okay, that one's easy. Technology. I'm not quite a Luddite, but I don't love technology for its own sake. I bear with it because it's 2024 and you can't survive without some technology at least. Plus I did this university stuff and you can't survive that without technology either. The challenge that might be the hardest is this pressure to edit. When in my first couple of videos I tried to edit videos for YouTube, I spent hours trying to figure out how to do things and what I was being told to do. Maybe not that many hours, but at least 3 or 4. 3 or 4 hours worth of trying to figure out something that I'm not interested in and I don't really understand is too much for me. I 1000% respect everyone who edits their channels well, but my channel is going to be me pressing start on my Galaxy Android and recording a video and then uploading it. I'd love to do those little thumbnails that put the covers of the books in the corner while you're talking about them, but no, I don't think that's anywhere within my technological capacity, so you're just going to have to put up with me holding up the cover while I'm talking about it instead. It's a bit of a shame. That's a nice, neat trick. Daisy Ex Machina, the editing in that is spectacular. Would that I could, but I know that I'm just not interested enough to invest that much of my life in editing. So the challenge to overcome the pressure to edit, that's probably going to be the hardest. Probably harder than actually editing would be, but there you go. That's what you've got to work with. Number 8 is asking me, when did you start reading? As I've mentioned, I read always is when I started reading. I probably was reading this level of book by the time I was 7. But an interesting story from my first grade, which was in Redcliffe, just up the coast from here. I actually got into trouble in first grade because the little girl sitting next to me in Redcliffe State School put up her hand and said, "She isn't reading, she's just looking at the pictures." Because by the age I was in first grade, which was 5 by the way, because of the way the Queensland system works, by then I was not only reading, I was reading fluently and I didn't have to mouth the words. So the rest of the kids in the class, and indeed the teacher I believe, Miss Rickwood, she loathed me. I don't know why. Anyway, the kids believed I wasn't really reading because instead of having to go word I just read it in my head like normal people. What's wrong with you? Why are you having to make strange sounds and move your mouths around to read? Anyway, so that's when I started reading. I always read I remember but when I was 4, I can remember my mother taking me to the local library to pick children's books, one of which was called Riki Tiki Tembo no Sarembo Cherryberry Ruchi Pip Perry Pembo. I remember that. Wow. Can't remember what I read last year. I can remember that. When I started reading science fiction was when I was in my early teens. I was reading Heinlein by the time I was 11, probably, maybe 13. By 13 I was reading Strange in a Strange Land. Might have been a bit young for it, not sure. Fantasy and science fiction I started on really early. It was a natural progression to me from the kind of children's books that I liked to them. I'm talking about back in the day when there was no internet to find them. You found them in the bookstore, and the shelf for science fiction was fantasy and science fiction, and it wasn't a big shelf. Most of my books came from secondhand or op shops. I was lucky to find new fantasy and science fiction on them. You didn't worry about them being a number 2 or 3 or 5 in a series. You just bought it, you read it, you hoped that one day you'd find the rest. It was very random. I don't, by the way, miss those days at all. I love having the whole world of books at my fingertips, and even on the internet, though I don't often buy them on the internet. So, fantasy and science fiction then. My first degree was actually science marine biology. That was when I got fully into reading non-fiction, specifically science non-fiction. I read a lot of science non-fiction. I read a lot of other non-fiction as well. I particularly enjoy reading non-fiction in art and sci-fi and science fiction, of course I've mentioned, and science non-fiction. Anything about the marine habitat is my jam. There aren't anywhere near many as books of that kind out there, but I try to get my hands on them when they come out. Okay, where do I read? Well, I used to read here in my spare room until my book lamp died. I better get a new one. Over there is my dining room table. If I'm eating on my own, I read there while I'm eating. If I'm eating out in a takeaway shop or wherever, fast food joint, and I'm on my own, I'm reading while I'm eating. Slightly right of over there is my couch. I read over there. I've got a special reading chair, perfect for winter, bit hot for summer. Even further away to the right is my veranda, where I've got a beautiful Balinese-style chair surrounded by plants, where I also read, if the mosquitoes aren't too bad. I read on the beach, as I've mentioned, which is my favourite reading. I haven't mentioned. My favourite reading room is the beach. Gold Coast, Queensland has beautiful beaches, but any beach in the world will do that I happen to be on. I put down my beach towel, I take my bottle of water, put it in the sand next to it, I take my beach bag, put it there as a base to lean my book on while I read, and facing the ocean. Why do people go to the beach and face away from the ocean? Why? Your feet can't see that ocean, your head can. Look at the ocean. And there I will sit and I will read my book, and when I want to contemplate what I've just read, I'll stare out over the ocean. It's wonderful. Sometimes it's exciting, depending on what washes up. I had a sea snake wash up one day. That was an exciting day. But yes, my favourite reading room is the beach. I'm not there today because the UV rating is, quite frankly, too high, even for me. I have very little consideration for sunburn or UV ratings, but today is taking that extra step. I was out there until about 10 a.m, but now it's too much. So where do I read? Where else do I read? I read anywhere pretty much. If I'm on an aeroplane going to another beach to read on, I'll be reading on that aeroplane. If I'm in the car, I will be listening to an audiobook usually. I have discovered that the police object to you stopping at a stoplight, whipping out this paperback and opening it up at your nearest page, so I don't do that. I never did that. Just saying, never did that. Audiobooks for the car, right? If I'm somewhere where I can't be reading, I might be listening to an audiobook. I read, therefore I can't read in the shower. I haven't mastered reading in the shower yet. It's bad for the books, you see. Otherwise, I read. Number 10. What kind of books do you like to read? Well, we've covered that a little bit already. Omnivorous reader, right? I read a lot of literature. You can see that shelf there. Dumas, love Dumas. Austen, love Austen. Dickens, beautiful. T.S. Eliot, some poetry. Not a lot of poetry, but T.S. Eliot, Ted Hughes, Dylan Thomas. There is poetry I read too, yeah? If there is a type of book that I don't read, it's typically because I used to read it and I don't read it anymore. Fantasy, sci-fi, classics by preference. I'm getting into more and more into modern sci-fi. I love cyberpunk. William Gibson is amazing. Neil Gaiman is a favourite of mine. The trade paperbacks are over there. And all the non-fiction down there. Tim Severin, Tom O'Kennelly. I still reread the Harry Potters because why wouldn't you? Ian M. Banks is over there, Tolkien is there, several books that no one but me has ever heard of. Seriously, there are 3 books that I read last year that on Goodreads, the number of other reads was 0 and I couldn't even find an image to post for them. Yes, I read omnivorously. Down the bottom, some of my old textbooks are. My first degree was science, marine biology, zoology, still reading that. My second degree was criminology, still love reading. Some thrillers, some fiction, true crime, and books relevant to crime, like modelling and so forth, far more interesting. What I don't read Westerns anymore. I did a lot when I was a teenager. I outgrew Westerns. I may one day go back to Louis de l'Amour, what was his name? Or something like that. But I had issues with Westerns after I'd read a lot of them and I stopped. I don't read as many thrillers as I used to. I used to be heavily into thrillers and I'd be heavily into mainstream fiction as I think of it. Don't read as many of those. I try to read a lot of Australian fiction and Australian books. Some of them are really good and they're not terribly visible on the world stage. Australia's got some amazing, more modern science fiction, dystopian, that I'll try and reread them in the next couple of years and post videos and reviews for them because honestly they are too little known. One of them over here is Anthony Eaton from West Australia. It's like no one seems to know about him, but oh my god, those books good. That's dystopia with a punch. What books don't I read? I used to read a lot of horror. There's that crossover where horror becomes sci-fi, where Ray Bradbury used to live. I like Ray Bradbury and I would still read him easily. When I was younger, I read a lot of horror, but it just sort of petered out in my mind. I got to the point where if I was reading a horror book, I was often either a little bit bored or had the desire to giggle at it. I just got a saturation. Same with horror movies. I used to watch a lot of those. I don't anymore. I think the final nail in the horror coffin was Brian Lumley. I read all of the Necroscope books, both the prequels and the sequels, and however that worked out. There were a couple of different series and different times. Really loved Lumley, read them all, and then I suddenly found that I was pretty much spoiled for horror. I'll still read a good Stephen King. Every now and then I've got a couple that I enjoyed so much I never got rid of. Thinner's up there somewhere, and The Green Mile. I don't find myself drawn to horror that much anymore. Every now and then there'll be a psychological horror that's good, but a lot of mainstream fiction has jumped on the psychological horror bandwagon, and they're now calling things psychological horror that have no acquaintance with psychological anything and certainly aren't horror. Mildly annoying, yes. Horror, no. So I probably won't read very many of those. You may not see a lot of reviews for those. And yeah, what kind of books do I like to read? I like to read good books. I like to read good books very much. There are many books out there that are good in many, many genres. I don't think I'll live long enough to read them all somehow. And I find that immensely encouraging. Having been marooned in countries that weren't English speaking, where I couldn't get enough books, I find it immensely reassuring that in the world of books, I will never ever run out. Unless Fahrenheit 459 kicks in which case I'm going to be the person living in that basement with my book collection. And possibly getting burnt out. Yeah, if you like the YouTube Booktube Newbie Tag, then tell me if I've done it right. Some people who tag seem to have a strange little colourful gibbidget next to it. I don't know how to work that. I'm just going to put a hashtag on it. If you've got any other newbie booktubers that you think I might enjoy, by all means recommend them. And thank you once again to Bianca Eleanor, for recommending I do this. It's been a bit of fun while I was in a reading slump, which I hope that I've gotten over now. See you in the next book review.